Alrighty. Good morning. I'm hoping you can all hear me. I've lowered the microphone considerably. Yeah, so I'll be talking about some work that we've done looking at the bifacial benefits under snowy conditions with single axis tracking. And I'd like to thank my co-author, who unfortunately couldn't be here, David Bowersox. We're at juwi Solar, which is a utility scale developer, EPC, O&M provider. So sort of the context of this talk will be, thinking about the utility scale and the hundreds of megawatts scenario. As an overview, these results and things that I'll be presenting on come from our bifacial test bed. So I'll describe how we've implemented that, and then just talk about some of the things that we've observed there around albedo, rear side irradiance, and this snow gains may be a little bit of a misnomer, but the gains that we see with bifacial versus monofacial modules under snowy conditions. And to set the mood, here's a picture of a very friendly snowy day for this array with snow on the ground, but not on the modules. All right, so our bifacial test bed, the motivation for it was that, a couple years ago, we realized, gosh, everything's going to bifacial, and, we haven't installed it yet, but we want to have something where we can have really detailed testing and get to look at what we want to in order to make better modeling predictions for the future. And so we went ahead and embedded this small bifacial test bed into an existing utility scale array. I know that there are lots of bifacial test beds out there, but this one for us was unique for our purposes because it's not just sitting alone, it's actually in this large array. We have the 375 watt modules, which seemed large at the time. We've gone ahead and it's in Colorado, so it's got snow, but it's a dry and sunny location. The snow does come and then tend to melt off fairly quickly. You can see, some of you can see, hopefully some of you can see over here, this is where our strings are. We've got bifacial and monofacial arrays strings that we're testing on exterior and interior rows, multiple strings on each. And the way that we've made it so that they're independent from the array yet embedded is by using amped DC to DC converters that allows them to operate sort of at their maximum power points without worrying about the system inverter because they don't quite match with it. As far as instrumentation goes, yes, I'm not so secretly trying to make it so that everybody can make these developers and put them in the arrays and do fun stuff with them. We've got an albedometer that's placed, a distance from the array, but over representative ground cover for the area. The plane of array and rear plane of array irradiance are measured with calibrated silicon reference cells. And I don't know how well you can see it, but on the rear side, we've chosen to put them behind the monofacial modules because we didn't want them blocking radiance for the bifacial tests. But we've got them close to the torque tube and at the edge of the module so that we can look at the difference in irradiance there. Tiny little thermocouple temperature sensors on there. We did test and make sure that they weren't impacting the performance. And then we've got, wind speed and humidity just from the site measurements that were already there. And data from this array has been used to create hourly PV-sys models, which I'll talk about in a little more detail. The thing I wanted to mention here was just that we have like a 1.23, I guess, DC to AC ratio on those models, which is fairly representative of our systems. So even though in this test bed, these things are operating independently and can get great bifacial gains, I do sort of temper them to match what we would expect to see in a real life utility scale array. All right, So looking at some of what we found, our albedo monthly averages for the site, I went ahead and compared them to just 3 different satellite sources of albedo, which I'm not naming explicitly, but you know, some of you can probably guess. Anyway, and I think the 2 things that I really noticed here were that the satellite sources don't match each other necessarily particularly well. In fact, it's source 3 is really the only one that seems to be seriously considering snow at the site when you look at like the January, February, December timeframes. And also our site measurements, I mean, they're averaged over 2 years, you know, so it's not a terribly long period of time, but they were actually fairly consistent, especially in the summertime. And you can see that they're, you know, a few ticks higher than what we're seeing with the satellite albedos. And so what does that mean for modeling? I went ahead and made a PVSYST model where I take the plane of array irradiance that we've measured on the site and put it into PVSYST to create the model. But then using these monthly albedo values, the measured and the 3 satellite ones. And so when you compare the annual energy production from, you know, these 3 satellite sources, you can see that they all ended up with lower production than our measured site albedo, most likely largely due to that summer difference, I think. But these are, you know, it's within 1%, which is good. But from a utility scale perspective, when we argue over 0.2% mismatch loss difference between, you know, our model and maybe the investor's model, these are actually fairly significant differences. And it's something that I would like to better understand is, you know, the differences between the satellite models and, you know, how we could better reduce this source of uncertainty. So if anybody wants to talk about that later, I'm in. Then we went ahead and looked at the rear plane of array irradiance. And you know, this slide is really comparing the difference between our sensors that were toward the torque tube and the sensor that's at the edge of the module. And you can see that consistently over the months, the edge of module does get quite a bit more irradiance. You know, that's a big difference. And you know, especially looking at those winter numbers, I don't know if you can really tell in this picture, but there's a little white line kind of in the corner. And actually on a lot of days when most of the snow has melted off at this site, there's still that line right at the base of the modules. And so I am guessing that some of the edge boost in the wintertime comes from that. Now, what does that mean for modeling? Again, went ahead and made some PVSYST models. In this case, though, I specifically fed PVSYST both the front and the rear plane of array irradiances, so that, you know, just because this was really trying to compare the edge and center effects and how they affected the model. And so you can see on the graph there, we've got the rear plane of array irradiance from the center, the edge, and then an average of the 2. And I've also recorded our measured gain, which has been scaled for clipping to the 1.23 DC to AC ratio. And what we found was that the annual measured gain actually lines up extremely well with averaging that center and edge plane of array irradiance that was on the back of the module. Now, could that be a coincidence? It's a small system. Yes, it certainly could. But it was a nice sort of result to have. And then I went ahead and said, okay, well, what if I compare this to a PVSYST model that, you know, for one of our actual existing arrays, I would truly run. And you can see that in this case, I put in the front plane of array irradiance, but I put in those measured albedo averages in PVSYST and let it figure out the rear plane of array irradiance. And it did fairly well with, you know, an irradiance fraction there, but the annual bifacial gain is quite a bit lower than what we had observed. And if you look, so the PVSYST with its calculated rear POA is that red-orange line. You can see that it's largely following the small dashed line, which is the center irradiance on the module, which I think I would have expected that. And so, the question is, this is just a test array, but is that the right thing to do, or should we be thinking about the greater irradiance over the module? The other thing to notice is that the discrepancy is distinctly larger in those wintertime months. And so that is what I will focus on next. So this is an actual picture from a camera that we have out at the array, which is why it's so incredibly blurry. And you can see that unlike the good friendly snow scenario that was pictured before, in this one, the modules are impacted and shedding unevenly. But so we used 2021 data for the rest of this analysis. I think it was a maybe slightly snowier year than normal for the site, but this just gives you an idea of sort of what the climate is like there, because I think that these results really could change if you were looking at this for a different array in a different location. Anyway, 54 days with snow cover on the ground, at least for part of the day, and 20 days where it appeared that the modules probably had some level of snow on their front sides, which was impacting their performance. And I guess I thought it was very important to mention again that this is sunny, dry Colorado. So results, hopefully somewhat visible from most spaces in the room. I'll describe these graphs a little bit just in case people aren't used to looking at them. This is for sunny days, so it's really the characteristic shapes that we expect to see. On the bottom, each of these white rectangles is a separate day, and so on the bottom you've got in gray the GHI, yellow is the plane of array radiance, which since it's a tracker, it's got those nice bunny ears on it. And the light blue is the rear plane of array radiance. And so on a sunny day with regular albedo, these are not scaled at all for clipping due to DC to AC ratio or anything, because they're on AMP devices. We saw a 9% gain, which I think is not unreasonable. I've also put them in kilowatt hours per kilowatt peak, so you get the idea of what they might actually mean. So that's a typical gain on a typical day. Then if you've got on the right-hand side, a sunny day with high albedo, you see that the rear plane of array radiance is really tracking the GHI more. So that's how you can tell that the albedo is high. And then we've got the expected higher gain up there. On a utility scale system, some of that would be clipped, but it's a nice increase in gain, like a 50% increase. And these are cases that I think a PVSys type tool models perfectly fine. Now, if we change to looking at overcast days, which don't occur terribly frequently in Colorado, on the left side there's an overcast day with no snow on the ground, and though the gain percentage is fairly high on that day, the actual gain is pretty low, but you can see that the plane of array radiance tracks with the GHI perfectly, so it's a very cloudy day. Then on the right side it gets a little bit more interesting, because this was a snowy day with high albedo. The rear plane of array radiance is super high, much higher than the front plane of array, because everybody got covered in snow and isn't reading. But if you look at the bifacial energy, you can see that it's quite a bit higher than the monofacial, and that's because of that rear side irradiance. That's actually quite a significant boost, and I think something that's not reflected in our current snow loss models. And then, if you have looked at no slides from this presentation, this is the one to look at. It's the crown jewel, only because when you have all these data, this is like the fun one. This is the days when there's snow shedding, which is a you know, I don't know, 1.5 handfuls full, counted on 2 hands. Anyway, and so you can see here that in both of these cases, there's higher rear plane of array irradiance sort of in the morning, and then it starts to taper off into the afternoon because, you know, the snow is melting and it's either disappearing or losing some of its albedo benefit. But then as far as the bifacial energy gain goes, you can see that the bifacial modules in the orange there are actually producing really well in the morning and at the night, whereas the monofacial modules are taking their time to, you know, shed the snow. And by the afternoon, they've sort of caught up to where you'd expect them to be, but they're losing like a full half day of performance. Okay, so what does this actually mean? It's fun to have the data, but what does it mean? Looking at the 20 days that were affected by snow cover on the front of the modules, those accounted for 20% of the system's overall bifacial energy gains as compared to the monofacial system, which is, you know, if you consider the fact that the bifacial gain was 6.5% or whatever, that's actually a significant amount over the course of a year. You know, it's like over 1% in bifacial energy gain. So that's something that, you know, we really need to model correctly and make sure that we're not leaving out on models. I don't know how many of you were at PVSC or saw Owen Westbrook's presentation, but he actually did some analysis for us around this array. I've borrowed his figure shamelessly. That, you know, showed he has a tool that he's written that can predict snow losses. And looking at our bifacial modules, he noted that their losses were lower than was predicted by either the Marion or the Townsend models that are out there. And, you know, I think that's for the reasons that we see here, that they're not accounting for the fact that, you know, on a snowy day, you're still going to, there'll be snow on the ground if there's snow on the front of your modules. So you're going to have that backside benefit. And also the quicker snow shedding. And so with that, just a summary, this first one is obvious, but I'm putting it out there again. A bifacial test bed is a great thing to have, or any kind of test bed. I'd really like to see more developers, you know, doing this and publishing, and it's fun. Then albedo is a non-trivial source of uncertainty that I think is something that we could work on in the community to better understand, especially as a lot of people are using satellite albedo, and what does it mean if we have ground albedo, and how should we look at that as compared to satellite if they are different. Then the irradiance on the rear side of the module, whether or not it's appropriate to look just at the center, or if we should consider a single axis tracking, that there's more on the edges. I think that's something that we're definitely thinking about. And finally, like I just said, the bifacial modules have faster snow shedding and the rear side boost. So I'm hoping that this can move forward, and hopefully with data from other people to figure out maybe a better bifacial specific and even single axis tracking specific snow loss model. That's it.